The Long Way Home =RK Part 3 =RK Tarkin Family Estate, Eriadu. Tarkin's family gardens were one of their pride and joys. On a world polluted by industries gone rampant, there were just a handful places left with natural greenery and even fewer when you could see trees and flowers from all over the galaxy thriving. It did take a sealed glass dome and artificially controlled environment, however Tarkin did possess one of the most beautiful pieces of Eriadu left. Their famous gardens were a great source of prestige, both home and abroad, as well as literally a place to get a breath of fresh air and relax. Or hold an important talk or two in a nice atmosphere while still remaining undisturbed. Gideon walked down a paved alley, sneaking under low-hanging branches heavy with colorful leaves. As far as the environmental control was concerned, it was spring and everything in the gardens was coming to life. Around him a dazzling array of flowers had their petals open towards the artificial light coming from the ceiling, making passing through this part of the garden a dazzling journey through clashing colors that, while looked like a painting by a maniac, was still somehow beautiful. He would never figure out what his mother though when she personally oversaw the overhaul of this part of the garden. She had planted flowers from all across the galaxy around this particular alley and had them arranged in such a way that the colors were just shy of eye-searing. He still didn't know if he found the place beautiful because he was biased. He did love his mother, and this was practically the last thing she did before dying years ago, or if she actually managed to craft a masterpiece in this part of the garden. At any rate, Wilhuff and he had given order to maintain this area just like their mother left it. Gideon never failed to pass through there in the increasingly rare occasions he had the time to visit the gardens. He just wished it was for pleasure and relaxation instead of work-related. Despite that, he was grateful that his sister-in-law chose to meet him in the gardens instead, in a more formal avenue. He found Thalassa sitting in a small secluded picnic area complete with wooden benches and tables, all antiques and treated to keep them safe from the environment. They were actually comfortable to sit on too, which was something everyone was thankful to his great-grandfather for. There was no obvious sign of Thalassa's security detail, though Tarkin was sure they were around, probably just out of reach of a quiet conversation but still able to see the place well. There was a lot of useful concealment around, just for that purpose. "Gideon, please have a seat." Thalassa smiled when she saw him and pointed at the bench across the table where she was sitting at. She had a light breakfast for two set up, complete with cups of hot tea and CF, though there was a bunch of data pads neatly stacked nearby. She had one in hand and had been reading when he arrived. "My Lady Thalassa." Gideon bowed as it was only proper before joining her at the table. "I have the hour from the battle ready." She waved a hand in dismissive gesture. "That's nice, but we both know I didn't call you to talk about the details. We all trust you to handle the military." His sister-in-law put down her data pad and gave him a frustrated look. "But let's first get the necessary things out of the way. We obviously won. Status of our remaining navy as well as odds of facing another such attack anytime soon. We lost about a third of the ships we had in system fending off the assault. Roughly half the others are damaged to some extent, however most will be at least 80% combat capability within the next day. Over the coming week we expect 10 fully operational cruisers coming back from repair docks all over the region, and I've called some more ships back before they're fully repaired. That would give us enough of a fleet to reasonably secure the system against any further raids when General Vale leaves. He'll be taking a not insignificant number of the ships left, I take it?" Thalassa frowned. "A lot of them are under his command, Corellian or Republic he brought with him. Unfortunately, most of our locally produced capital ships, before we got authorization and the plans for Vinotas, were of lower capability, and they did take disproportional casualties when facing separatist battleships. It's something we'll be addressing when the next Venator construction cycle is complete. We'll be relegating our old types as heavy escorts." Lady Tarkin raised a hand in a forestalling gesture. "That's too much detain for the time being. We'll be covering further expansion of the Navy and how to pay for it later. If I get it right, we'll have Eriadu secured over the next week, right?" Gideon nodded and carefully picked up a cup of CF to take a sip. While his hangover was mostly over, he still wasn't feeling quite alive yet. "Good enough. Thank you for your service, Gideon. Now for the real reason why I called you, your friend Vale." She grimaced. "We all had our qualms about him. He's a Sith after all. However, he did explain well enough that debacle at Camino. More importantly, Not only Wilhuff but Admiral Holt and her Corellians backed up his version of events. If it was just the clones swearing up and down it was a weird Force-related accident, I wouldn't have bought it. She growled. The clones might have obeyed, no questions asked. Even if it was their home he ordered bombarded. The Corellians and your brother? Lady Tarkin shook her head. They had no reason to obey such insane orders, which as they all point out were never given in the first place, and the computer records of the battle and the Freedom CIC confirm it. Without having access to the Force we can't really be sure if Vail is actually saying the truth, but his version of events does explain how everything went so wrong. Gideon still found it hard to believe how a whole planet could have been glassed by accident, yet all available evidence pointed at that outcome instead of pointless malice. There simply was no reason for Vail to want to gut the whole planet outright, though there were voices grumbling that even attempting to deny critical assets on the ground to the Separatists would have been going too far even if everything didn't go terribly wrong. However, Sullust did happen. Vail insists he was going only after military targets. You supported him on that one along with a lot of our officers, both Navy and ground side. That might even be the case, and he did make a convincing case. What I need to know is, can we trust him enough to continue working with the man? Some of our allies are unconvinced. Well, legally speaking he's more or less covered about Sullust. The best angle of attack would be that it should have been a political decision if the war should escalate that much. Gideon raised both hands in a forestalling gesture. Which would be foolish after what the Separatists already did. They obviously have no qualms about using biological weapons or bombarding non-military targets, not just legitimate ones. That's unfortunately a point in Vail's favor. Speaking about politics, he's not just a general of the GAR, he's Mandalorian, the former Supreme Commander of the Republic military. Wilhuff said he was very close to Palpatine before the Chancellor's assassination, so he would know what the former Republic leadership intended as far as escalation and reasonable response are concerned. As Mandalore he has the political clout to order retaliatory strikes after what Grievous did to his throne world, so to speak. All those are nice excuses, believable, possibly true as well. None of them tells me if we can actually trust the man. Gideon thought about it, took another sip of CF and wondered aloud. Did we really trust him in the first place? This alliance isn't based on goodwill, nor trust. It's about our best interests given the political and military situation. So far, General Vail, or would it be more appropriate to call him Mandalore in this instance, has held up his part of the bargain. After Wilhuff went off on the deep end and forged this mid-rim alliance of his, Del-Qatar did his best to give us the best chance he could. Tarkin sighed. Speaking as a military man, he might very well had succeeded. Our best guess is that right now the Separatists are throwing everything they have in this region at Naboo, where Wilhuff and the rest of the Republic forces in the area should be facing them. After yesterday, a victory there would ensure that the Confederacy won't be able to take us out with local forces, and the big question remains, will they spend the time and resources needed to subdue us when they have a much bigger fish to fry? The core, Thalassa stated. It is a big risk. It always was. Besides, once General Vail heads back for the Republic, it's very likely that instead of going after us the Confederacy would throw any spare fleets they have after him, thus buying us time. Will we get enough of it anyway? No way to be certain. In the long term, unless the Republic wins or at least manages to open the major hyperlanes leading to our part of space and reinforces us, we're done for. We'll have to pray for Confederate collapse if that doesn't happen. We got off track here. Vail, Thalassa demanded. As I said, we never trusted him as a person. He is a self-proclaimed Sith after all. It's Mandalore following a course of action serving his and his people's best interest we're banking on, aren't we? We know how most of the core sees the Mandalorians. It was shrewd of him to make the deals he did with us. We'll bankroll the expansion of the Mandalorians' industry as well as recovery of their capital world, and exchange we'll be getting preferential access to a huge new market, thousands of worlds across the Mandalorian region we currently have little to no trade with. I ran the numbers. Thalassa grumbled. While the initial investments will be steep, they will pay for themselves in the long run. That's why a lot of the corporate interests were on board with the alliance. Then there were our fears about the Republic, which in the end might be either unfounded or not grave enough. Chancellor Satine Kenobi Nakriz, the current Supreme Commander of the GAR, being General Obi-Wan Kenobi, our friendly Siths-in-laws. I certainly didn't see that one coming. From what I gather, General Vail got blindsided by that revelation too. They do owe him allegiance. Technically, anyway. We don't really know how close they are or if that supposed fealty they owe Mandalore really means anything. Needless to say, Vale claims they're thick as thieves. Thalassa smiled wryly. That's a very big new complication, you know. You mean that backstabbing the Sith for short-term political gain might be an even worse idea than it was before? That was only the worst-case scenario option if he went on the deep end, right? And as far as you military types are concerned he hadn't? Gideon pursed his lips. A reluctant no on that. As a man I found his actions at Sullust abhorrent. As the commander in charge of Iriadu's security, simply throwing fleets at the separatists won't work. After Corellia's fall both sides are too evenly matched. We'll have to go after their industries, both in space and on the ground, and it would be seldom we would have the luxury of letting workers and anyone else in the vicinity of such targets evacuate. If you told me that a few years ago I would have done my best to have your head examined by specialists, you know. Thalassa huffed. Before the war really get going I would have agreed with you. Gideon shrugged. You'll be with me when I have to reassure our allies again. And when I have to keep those ready to become too close to Vale because of his in-laws from falling over themselves to please him too. Thalassa warned. As my lady commands. With that out of the way. Gideon, what are those rumors I hear about a more interesting version of the you just brought me finding its way to the holonet? Thalassa smiled pleasantly. Tarkin froze like a small mammal caught in the open by a starving predator. Another version of the He smiled. It came out genuine, right? I have no idea whatsoever what you're talking about, my lady. Thalassa's grin became predatory as she picked the topmost datapad from the stack. I'm pretty sure I have it right here. I believe that now I'll take my leave, my lady Thalassa. Someone has to keep a close eye on General Vale while he's still in system. Do have a nice day, my lady. Gideon got up, gave a stiff but very much proper bow and hastily strode away with as much speed as propriety and dignity would allow. He was going to find out who among his staff backstabbed him in such a way, and when he was done with those bastards they would beg that he would hand them off to the Sith. == Observation deck. Republic cruiser shining light. Iriadu. That's a neat idea. Gideon commented after examining what the Republic engineers had transformed the former bridge into. The place was a verifiable lounge, complete with a bar of all things, though the latter might have been added by the crew in their spare time. It makes for a nice place to relax, and it's not like anyone should be here during combat, so the huge vulnerable windows are non-issue nowadays. If there was more time during the refits as well as the available equipment, the command tower would make for a nice sensor mast. Del Qatar was saying. He was also pointedly pouring cups of scalding hot CF to his guests. Gideon still resented the man from getting out of the night of drinking hangover free. That was so unfair it wasn't even allowed, damn it. You had to face consequences when you got drunk like hey. I want to run a few ideas by you. Del Qatar interrupted his musings. What insanity are you planning today, sir? Joanna inquired in a long-suffered tone. Our voyage back to Republic-controlled space. That got their attention all right. So you're really leaving after hitting Naboo? We kept to the rim for too long already. Vale nodded. We have a few options, at least as long as your brother and company still hold Naboo when we get there. Otherwise we'll have to make a run for it, directly for Hutt space, and try losing any pursuit there before backtracking. We'll be discussing what to do if the situation isn't criffed up beyond any reason. Do tell. Gideon suggested and picked up his cup. It was just shy of boiling, and the smell alone was enough to focus his mind. Vale did outline his 3 rough plans. Shouldn't we make a run for Hutt space ASAP anyway? Any other options means more combat and expending fuel and munitions that are in a short supply. Joanna pointed out. That's a concern. Major one at that. Still, I would like that we pass through either Bothor or Orlanos, where we might be able to link up with surviving naval elements. When we go through Hutt space we'll probably hit Nar Shaddaa, where we might be able to pick up some supplies too. I do have contacts there with loyal elements of Republic intelligence. I hope so anyway. There was obviously something the general was reluctant to say about that particular operation, and none of them felt like pushing. As far as Gideon was concerned, it wasn't really his place to know, though he was curious. Option 3 has the benefit of having a minimal number of jumps through separatist space, though if something goes wrong there you'll be left stranded deep behind enemy lines with predictable consequences. Option 1, while safest will require the largest number of jumps and thus most expenditure of hypermatter, and that is one consumable we're short is ton. That road has only 2 jumps through Confederate space after we clear Enoch. The rest would be through territory they captured recently and thus will almost certainly lack fixed defenses or any major fleet concentrations. We'll have to hit just Molavar and Yukio before reaching Rishi, and after that Manda. One of those 2 worlds might still hold too, though we can get there in another way too. Del-Qatar offered. That would require striking through separatist space, which is less than ideal. Can you really hit anything important enough to warrant risking your fleet being pinned down and overwhelmed? Not really. The best we can reasonably get is hitting a few soft targets and stirring up Assis into chasing us, which while might be disruptive can prove fatal. Del-Qatar grimaced. However, he shrugged. We'll get chased when they figure out what we're trying anyway. Joanna finished for him. All roads lead to Nashadar then? Gideon frowned. Unless we want to either make a larger detour or pass through more separatist space. Del-Qatar confirmed. The long way home. RK equals. Part 4. RK equals. Shuttle DB9A31. Stratosphere. Naboo. Tigellinus had to admit, the view was breathtaking. That was saying something considering he watched the unfolding battle from the co-pilot seat of an evacuation shuttle after his flag got shot from under his feet. For the 3rd time since the siege of Naboo recommenced. This time it was a close call from a ramming attempt. A damaged Munificent almost managed to slam into the stratagem's flank, however concentrated fire from the cruiser itself and her escorts blew it up shortly before it could make contact. Unfortunately, that still left an awful lot of tonnage coming in at near relativistic speeds, and a lot of that high-velocity shrapnel did connect. It was the difference from losing the stratagem with most of the crew and merely the old girl getting her flank perforated and accumulating enough damage to mission kill her and prompt evacuation before the next wave of the enemy could come to grips with her. Just to make things more interesting, in this sector of the battlescape, the Separatists managed to fight their way to the edge of the atmosphere, forcing more than a few Republic ships into it to prevent an orbital drop or bombardment straight on top of Theed, which was right below them. That made for some very impressive fireworks caused by turbolaser fire, missiles and explosions in an environment where they actually had something to burn. In the distance, the Admiral could see a damaged Venator slowly losing her fight with gravity and gently gliding down through the atmosphere. Battle damage and friction soon turned her into a fiery comet, and Tigellinus hoped that the ship was under enough control to make a gentle landing, otherwise the impact was going to wipe out a significant chunk of real estate planetside. We've got confirmation, sir. Admiral Tarkin has resumed operational command over the battle. The pilot informed him. At least that went according to plan. Again, he didn't add. Soon after the battle began, Tarkin got his own flag blown up but managed to evacuate. After that they quickly hashed up a chain of command in case either of them had to displace to another ship or got properly blown up. The pilot went evasive when the threat receiver screamed its shrill warning. Laser fire flew just above the canopy, barely missing the shuttle. Then a nearby cruiser responded, and only the canopy polarizing saved the sight of the people in the cockpit when hundreds of Guardian emplacements wiped out of existence whatever was gunning for the shuttle. The sheer volume of fire caused turbulence despite the nearly non-existent atmosphere at this height, and the small ship shook, forcing the pilot to struggle for control. One of the few light cruisers the Republic had left in the fight gracefully flew above the Venator and unleashed a missile barrage that looked like fiery lances tearing through the heavens. The cruiser below followed suit, and it literally disappeared behind the engine plumes of hundreds of AA missiles. A torrent squadron is vectoring in to cover us. Should we continue to the new designated flag or land on that Venator? The pilot asked. The flag. Tigellinus ordered. Landing on a ship in the atmosphere, in the middle of the battle, was going to be hazardous, not to mention it was going to make it a target and potentially bring it down on top or near the capital. The pilot banked right, which allowed the Admiral to see the effect of the missile barrage. A damaged Separatist dreadnought was skirting the edge of the atmosphere above. Its underside was scoured by weapons fire, and obviously the umbrella was either heavily compromised or outright gone. Apparently the same was true for a lot of the sensors, because the ship flew fat and dumb into the missile barrage without trying to evade. The AA missiles finished scouring the underside from working equipment and further hammered the armor. Then the light cruiser's ordnance hit and 4 blinding explosions lit up the sky. There was just enough atmosphere there to enhance the shock waves a bit, and when the glow cleared it revealed an expanding fireball with a ship broken in two in the center. The rear section soon went critical and exploded, which only helped propel the nose in a terminal dive towards the planet. The Venator accelerated towards the large piece of wrecked ship and unleashed its broadside upon it, shattering it into pieces hopefully small enough to either burn on re-entry or at least not cause too much damage. Then the shockwave reached the shuttle, and Tigellinus now knew how the contents of a shaking tin can felt. =Arche equals CIC, Republic Cruiser Shield Bearer, High Orbit, Naboo. Controlled chaos surrounded Wilhuff Tarkin when he walked into his new flag's CIC, after a power surge messed up communications from the makeshift flag bridge built in an unused briefing room. Coordinate with Broodmother's and Dawn's battle groups. I want that battleship silenced. The captain, an older-than-usual-looking clone, ordered just as the Admiral entered. Admiral on deck. The sergeant in charge of the CIC's security detail snapped. Carry on, we've got a battle to win. Tarkin waved. Good to have you on board, sir. The captain spared a moment to greet him. Fight your ship, Captain. The Admiral walked to the hollow tank, and after getting a nod from the skipper he zoomed out the tactical plot until he could see as much of the battlefield engulfing most of Naboo above the capital and the surrounding space. Nothing of note had changed since he had to move to the CIC. The enemy was still pressing hard, and barring a miracle, they would get at least neutral skies above Theed sooner or later. Right now both sides were almost evenly matched, but that wouldn't last. While initially the Separatists outnumbered the Republic forces significantly, they spent a lot of ships to break gas formations and reach the planet. They just kept coming aware that the supply situation of the Republic Navy was bad and soon would be critical. They also wanted a fast victory this time, not like the prolonged siege they were content with the last time, which nicely preserved their own ships while whiting down the gas ammunition and fuel stocks. If the Separatists just kept pushing, the Republic lines were going to break, of that Tarkin was certain. The fleet was at 20% Tibanna gas levels across the board, with certain ships as low as 15. There was no way to safely resupply in the middle of the battle, and that was mostly a moot point. Tarkin had to order the captured enemy fuel and Tibanna tankers to scatter in deep space until the battle was resolved. The big question was if the Separatists had committed everything they could afford. Tarkin did have reinforcements incoming after they secured Malastur. Sooner or later Vale would be coming too if he was alive, unless he had to fight a defensive battle at Eriadu or his way through an unexpected blockade at Darknell. Though that wasn't something Tarkin could count on, he had no idea how the strike at Sullust had turned out. The worst-case scenario was that there would be more Separatist ships coming to counter his own reinforcements, and then things were going to get especially ugly. He did have a contingency for that case. It was cold-blooded, it was going to be very expensive, but there was no much use for ships unable to shoot. Get a line to Theed. Tarkin ordered after examining the plot for a few more seconds. I want to know if the shields down there are up and if we have any forces outside their screens. Give me a status on the weapons on that battleship the Separatists parked next to the city too. Are any of them operational and able to shoot up? Working on it, sir. I want our ships above Theed ready to pull back. We're about to redress our lines and do our best to collapse the enemy's flanks. If we can suck them a bit closer to the planet, we might be able to englobe them and maximize our firepower advantage while minimizing the amount they can effectively bring to bear. If it worked, it still wasn't going to be enough. Unless the Separatists cut and ran, the Republic fleet wouldn't able to kill them all before most of the fleet ran out of ammunition. Add the expected battle losses, and when the dust settled, the enemy would likely take control of the system. If it wasn't for the force coming from Malastur. Sir, we just went under 20% Tibanna gas reserves. The weapons officer reported. That's a court-martial offense right there. The captain mused. Fuel? He idly asked. Fusion is all right. Hypermatter, tanks less than a quarter full. Not too shabby. If the major hyperlanes weren't under enemy control. Another court-martial offense? Tarkin asked. That's more than a few for you too, sir. I would be pleasantly surprised if that isn't the case across the fleet. Well, let's make sure we win the battle so we can worry about any possible legal complications. Admiral, Theed's and Naboo's shields are up and operational. The grounded Lucree Hulk has working only secondaries, good enough to discourage airstrikes or the odd munificent. "What about our forces down there?" Tarkin asked. "We've got units scattered all over the place outside the theater shields, sir. They were busy hunting down clanker stragglers from the siege. A lot of them won't make it back to safety in time. Orders are out for them to go to ground and under as a solid cover as they can find." "That won't really be a good enough," Tarkin sighed. "Damn it, such a waste. Have our ships above Theed begin pulling back." He began issuing the orders that would hopefully trap the Separatists against Naboo. He hoped that the reinforcements would come before his fleet ran out of things to shoot with. =RK equals Part 5 =RK equals CIC Republic Cruiser Adler. Low orbit above Naboo. When Admiral Tigellinus finally got himself back in command of a part of the battle, the situation had changed. The Republic ships at Naboo were divided, leaving a straight corridor leading to the planet, right about the capital. A significant number of the remaining enemy was pouring right in, hell-bent to exploit the breach in Gar's formation. Their ships at the edge were hammering at everything in range, doing their best to peel out the flanks and thus widen the breach leading to Naboo. It took him a few moments to figure out what Tarkin was thinking and to determine that yes, the enemy hadn't fought their way clear to the planet yet. It was sound plan, in theory, if the Republic Navy at Naboo had enough ordnance left to actually shoot up all the Confederate ships they were trying to trap. Status of ammunition reserves, ours and across the fleet. Tigellinus barked an order. He sent a quiet prayer to the god he didn't believe into that friendly reinforcements would turn up soon, then began issuing orders to redress the wavering Republic formation in order to pull back damaged ships and maximize firepower at the point of contact. 15% Tabana for us. Between 12 and 17 across the fleet. Came the shocked response. Perhaps another prayer wouldn't hurt? There was always the chance, no matter how remote, that the enemy would decide they have miscalculated about the state of Republic supplies and break off, allowing the GAR units to resupply from captured stocks. At least Tarkin's bid for short-lived pirate life was quite successful. It was unfortunate that there was no time to distribute the haul he brought back. In 2 minutes the fleet will advance upon the enemy. Concentrate fire on their light elements. The worst came to worse, if they could gut the Separatist escorts and leave just battleships around, there was always the last resort for the desperate and insane. Outside, the mutual annihilation continued apace. Ships tore themselves apart in mutual funeral pyres, fighters and bombers sneaked in sensor shadows ready to jump at any damaged unit vulnerable for such attack, while the cap of both sides watched warily to jump on any such attempt. Admiral Tarkin confirms, advance will commence in 1 minute. The Separatists are commencing bombardment upon Theed. The shields are holding. They can't hope to breach the defenses anytime soon. Look for landing craft masked by the bombardment. Tigellinus suggested. The formation is redressed, sir. Our freshest ships are on point. The fleet will advance now. The Admiral ordered. =RK equals. And advance it did. The two wings of the Republic fleet seemingly collapses as they stretched and thinned their ranks to surround the enemy and maximize their firepower. The Separatist frigates and light destroyers took the brunt of the incoming firepower. One after another, the escorts burned when they became targets for multiple heavier ships. Others found themselves facing the undivided attention of whole packs of Republic frigates, just enough firepower to overwhelm their shields in short order and mission kill if not outright destroy. They didn't go quietly into the night either. Droid precision was good enough to concentrate the return fire even as the Republic erased whole munificent divisions. Coordinated barrages slammed into still replenishing shields and soon Venottas, acclimators and locally built, less capable cruisers, had to depend on their armor belts. In some cases, said last line of defense was intact and it held, for a time. In others, not so much. At any rate, the weapon systems and sensors mounted on those ships were by necessity less well protected. Venottas had to fall back when they lost most of their weapons in order to be replaced by ships that could still shoot. Others were less fortunate. The incoming fire found gaps in armor that couldn't be properly fixed with the time and resources available between the battles. Soon enough, Republic ships began to die too. First to go was a Venator, unfortunate enough to become the sole focus of four mostly intact munificent divisions. Her shields broke, the following barrage blew through compromised armor and one more was all it took. Dozens of turbo laser bolts slammed into the open superstructure of the cruiser and found something vital. When the following salvo hit, it wasted itself into an expanding ball of plasma and scything debris. Those frigates' triumph was a short-lived one. Return fire from the Venator's consorts soon saw them gone, but not before they managed to damage another cruiser and wipe out the Republic ship's own escorts. Soon enough, the battle lines reformed. The bulk of the Separatist fleet was funneled into a cigar-shaped formation with Naboo in front, the Republic navies surrounding them from most directions and only a spreading group of their ships at the back fighting desperately to prevent a complete envelopment. By that point, the GAR actually had a slight numerical advantage, though a significant number of the Confederate ships they managed to trap were Lucree Hulk battleships and Providence dreadnoughts. Firepower-wise, the Republic was actually outgunned, thought they still retained an advantage at the point of contact on the edge of the two formations. Under different circumstances, the tactical situation would have at worst spelled a Pyrrhic victory for the GAR. =RK= CIC, Republic Cruiser Shield Bearer, high orbit above Naboo. That actually worked. The captain, whose name Tarkin couldn't bloody remember, stated. Now we have to enjoy the spoils. The aging clone grumbled. Tarkin silently agreed. The losses getting so far were actually a bit worse than he anticipated. There were too many ships suffering not yet repaired damage from previous engagements, and the cumulative effects reared their ugly heads in the worst possible moment. Too many of the remaining Republic ships blinked amber on the tactical display designating them as damaged. Others were grey and pulling back for now, showing they were no longer combat effective. They were going to be the last resort. Probably soon too. For few more minutes the slaughter continued in silence broken only by the captain giving orders and the odd report for his ears. We're down to 7% Tibanna gas and out of ordnance for all launchers. Status of the fleet. 6% on ammunition stocks and going steadily down. The fleet will continue to advance. All combat ineffective ships and those with over 60% of their weapons knocked out, prepare to execute Case Red. Tarkin ordered in a detached voice, as if he didn't just order a suicidal ramming attack upon the enemy capital ships. Which might not even be enough if the Separatist either got lucky or had someone fast on their feet in charge. Concentrate firepower to clear up approach lanes for the Case Red units. He idly hoped that enough of the crews had time to evacuate, but he knew that wouldn't be the case for a lot of those ships. The Republic formation shifted again and everything with still operational engines surged forward. GAR firing patterns changed as whole battle groups concentrated on blasting a road through the remaining Separatist escorts. More munificence and recusant died and Republic cruisers flew to take their place and keep the newly created holes in the enemy formation open. Various damaged ships surged into the holes, and initially the Confederate forces were slow to react. It took them time to figure out what the maniacs surrounding them were up to, and then precious moments to believe that the Republic stole an idea from their playbook. When that happened, the remaining Separatist escorts and whole battleship divisions accelerated to plug the gaps before the kamikazes could get among them. Fighters and bombers erupted from the sensor shadows of the advancing ramming ships and descended all over the Confederacy Navy from close to point-blank range. What was left from the Vulture Cap went for the kill, and over the next couple of minutes the battlefield was chock-full with tiny explosions signifying dying small craft. The Republic bomber contingent at Naboo virtually ceased to exist then and there, but not before hammering the Separatist force that tried to plug the gaps in the formations of their escorts. First to go was the Acclamator Firebird, who slammed into a damaged Lucree Hulk propelled by redlined engines. Hyperspace events. Multiple hyperspace events. Damn it, we're committed now, Tarkin snapped. Get a sensor fix on them, I want to know how many and who are they. Two distinct forces. One is 4 light minutes above us, IFF read friendly. The other is 3 light minutes behind us. Separatists, sir. Contact our reinforcements. Have them intercept the enemy reserve. Tarkin ordered. This was sheer providence. The Separatists sucked them nice before calling up their reserves. Either that or they got fortunate on when their own reinforcements arrived. The Republic force at Naboo was committed with no good way to disengage. If they did so right now, they would lose a lot of ships anyway, perhaps most, and wouldn't have anything to show for it, not to mention that if the enemy could track them down before they could resupply, it would be all over anyway. Jedi Master Madoran acknowledges. He's dispatching a part of his force to reinforce us and taking the rest against the second enemy formation. My compliments to the Jedi Master. Case Red will continue as planned. The long way home. =RK=. Part 6. RK equals. CIC, Republic Cruiser Adler, Naboo. It's all gone to hell out there. The captain spoke quietly. The CIC around him was subdued. The crew did their job as quietly as possible while too many of their comrades were going on one last, one-way charge. There's nothing else we can do. Rufan's voice was barely a whisper. Tabana level 1.3%. The weapons officer interjected, underlining how deep a hole they've dug themselves in. Despite the jamming thrown by both sides and all the firing and explosions going on making a hash of the sensor picture, it was quite clear what was happening in the center of the not quite englobed separatist formation. Massive energy spikes complete with explosions registered by visual sensors confirmed that more and more Republic ships ran the enemy, ships that were either out of ammunition to shoot with or had the bulk of their weapons disabled. Keep firing until all guns run dry. Get all non-essential personnel off this ship once that happens, and by that I mean everyone. We don't need to steer her into ramming a separatist battleship. The Admiral ordered. Aye, sir. Keep firing until we run dry, then ram one of the bastards. The captain declared cheerfully. You heard the man. Get all non-essential personnel to the escape pods and any shuttle we've got in the hangar. The clone turned to look at Rufan. Sir, I recommend you make your way to the nearest shuttle or escape pod and displace to another ship. I think I'll stay. Rufan shook his head. The captain merely raised an eyebrow, stood at attention and gave the Admiral a formal salute. It's an honor to have you with us, sir. Tigellinus wasn't sure what exactly prompted the decision to stay. Was it all the people this insane plan was consigning to glorious death? Perhaps it was the fact that they were clones, and to his consternation it wasn't until they went to certain death for the Republic, following a plan he had a part in thinking up, that he suddenly began thinking of them as real people. Many clones had died under his commands since the war began, yet he felt little regret over that fact. Certainly much less than he had when real people died. It was just now that it really hit him. Did he even know why the clones followed such suicidal orders without question or even a word of protest? Why were they fighting for? Why were they so ready to die for a republic whose people didn't give a damn about them? Signal from Admiral Tarkin. Reinforcements, both our and separatists just entered the system. Half of ours are moving to aid us with the rest heading to intercept the new enemy formation. Too little, too late, hopefully for the separatists. It's not like we can disengage now without getting this fleet gutted for no gain. Keep going. The Atlas consorts formed around her in a protective formation, with what few escorts they had left moving in their shadows ready to dart out and intercept any enemy ramming attempt. More and more GAR units emulated the behavior of their flag, and soon almost a third of the Republic ships in system were bearing upon the enemy, dead set on ending them by any means possible. It finally percolated in the separatists' brains what exactly was about to happen, and they responded in kind. It was usually quite hard to ram a ship in space. They were fast, reasonably agile, and there was, well, a lot of space where they could evade. None of that was true in the current situation. The bulk of the Cis fleet at Naboo was sandwiched against the planet. A lot of their ships were still rotating to point away from Naboo, and there simply wasn't enough space to maneuver, nor they possessed the necessary acceleration to easily evade the Republic ships coming for them. Still, some of the enemy did get in a position to execute their own ramming runs. The GAR ships under Tigellinus used what little ammunition they had left to blast their way through the separatist escorts coming their way, and when that proved insufficient, the few surviving frigates flew from the sensor shadows where they hid and went for a physical intercept. The escorts tore at each other with a suicidal abandon, and in their wake cruisers plowed through expanding clouds of high-velocity debris. A burning Venator with not a single weapon left flew in the front and headed straight for the nearest Lacree hulk. Last-ditch defensive fire broke her to pieces, which continued to head in the same direction, and the enemy didn't have enough space to maneuver every which way it could go. There were more incoming Republic ships hell-bent to ram it. An acclimator with shredded superstructure came next, and this time there was not enough time to reduce her to debris before she slammed into the evading enemy battleship. The sheer kinetic energy combined with hypermatter reactors going critical saw another short-lived star be born, and when the dust settled there was a tiny nebula made of two mostly vaporized ships left behind. More damaged Republic ships flew true, and that Lacree hulk's whole division soon vanished in the hearts of blinding explosions, thus opening the way deeper into the enemy formation, where more and more GAR units charged in heedless of the fate awaiting them. Equals Arche equals. CIC, Republic Cruiser Shining Light. 2 light seconds from Naboo. Seconds after our arrival, when the sensors refreshed, we saw exactly what we flew into. There were 2 ongoing battles, large one right on top of Naboo and a smaller engagement by a Gar force outnumbered 3-1. I want IFF of the ships in each formation and open communication with whoever is in charge, both in space and planet side. Get me an update on the status of our forces. I ordered. I want insertion coordinated, calculated and distributed for each battle. We'll probably reinforce both at the same time. At a first glance the situation appeared very good for our side. The enemy at Naboo was trapped against the planet, and if I didn't know better, I would conclude that they would be shot to pieces before they could disengage. I did know better. The only reason my own ships were reasonably well stocked was salvage from all the wrecks left in the wake of the battle and a continuous low level of munition and fuel supply coming from deeper in the western quadrant, as well as what we managed to steal from Sullust. Our forces at Naboo had much fewer systems available to provide supply, and they might not have had the time to salvage anything from lost ships. That only left whatever they managed to steal during their raids, if they went more or less according to plan in the first place. I had to assume that our ships were about to run out of ammunition if some of them hadn't already. This could turn very ugly very fast, but at least it wasn't all bad. The worst-case scenario had us arriving to find Naboo under separatist control after they had wiped out the rest of our forces in the region. Open a channel, all frequencies, ours and separatists, full power. I barked. I waited for a moment until the comms officer gave me a thumbs up. This is General Delcatar Vale to all separatist forces in system. You are the only combat-capable Confederate formation left in this whole region of space. Your counterattack at Iriadu failed miserably. You are outnumbered, outgunned, and the bulk of your forces are trapped. Surrender and I will personally guarantee your safety. Continue to resist and I will do my utmost to see you meet as painful a death as I can arrange. Choose now. We've got a line to Jedi Master Mandolin, General. There's still no response from whoever is in charge at Naboo. Contact Admiral Holt. She'll command the units reinforcing Mandolin. She'll take. I listed a number of cruiser divisions along with appropriate escorts. Now put Mandolin on and the officer in charge at Naboo as soon as we get into contact. RK equals. Part 7. RK equals. CIC, Republic Cruiser Shining Light. Naboo. The CIC was subdued. Everyone could feel my raging fury the moment Tarkin got into contact and gave me a rough sitrep. Since the moment he proposed this whole mess, I knew the odds were excellent that everything would crash and burn in a spectacular fashion. That was precisely what was happening right now. The bulk of the separatist forces in system were trapped at Naboo by a Republic fleet that was practically out of anything to shoot with and were left to execute ramming attacks upon the enemy. The best-case scenario, we were going to lose a lot of ships at Naboo. The worst case, the separatists there would fight their way out and either maul my other forces or flee so they could continue to pose a threat. I spat a vile hut curse. Say what you will about the worms, their language was unique, set up for all kinds of creative and inventive swearing. It was appropriate too, because what could still happen here at Naboo wasn't actually the worst-case scenario. That was the Confederacy finally deciding that they really needed to rid themselves of yours truly and had couple more sector fleets en route, in which case we were all criffed terminally. There wasn't much I could do in such a case except running with as many ships I could extract and hope for the best. So until and unless heavy enemy reinforcements turned to darken my day, I had to clean up Tarkin's little mess. Mandolin, you and Admiral Holt will take care of the enemy reinforcements. I'll do my best to salvage the situation at Naboo. Joanna, you have tactical command. I raised a hand when the plant man made to protest. She has more experience commanding battles in space. It's something we'll work on once time permits, along with getting you and your 3 friends up to snuff with all manners of force-related things you should have been taught by the Jedi. Carry out your orders. For a moment let my eyes shone with the power of the dark side. It wouldn't be long before my newest minions grew enough of a backbone after I turned them to become a liability. I would need to either arrange a glorious death in combat for them, take a more personal touch in overseeing them, or dispose of them myself before that happened. Or I could let them criff up by the numbers after getting drunk on the dark side and use that as one more nail in the coffin of the Jedi Order. I still was bitter about the bastards going for a coup and messing up everything. Orders, sir? The captain asked. The fleet will advance towards Naboo. Standard assault formation. Our fleet there will be collapsing shortly. They're running out of ammo if they all haven't all done so already. Concentrate on disabling enemy ships. Priorities are weapons and propulsion. What little small craft assets we have left are to stay back and deal with any enemy unit that has its umbrella neutralized. There was no time for finesse this time around. Thinking about it, ever since I got stuck with the Republic, I really didn't have the opportunity to get creative. Doing so would require that I get stuck with the fleet for months in an environment that would allow me to drill them like a well-oiled machine instead of relying on battle meditation for anything fancy. If it wasn't for Skywalker's stunt before Geonosis, I would have done precisely that and might have been able to keep my trump card hidden for longer. There was no point considering what ifs. To his credit, Mandolin wasted no time, threw everything he had, that wasn't already joined the melee above Naboo, at the separatists he was engaging. Thus he fixed them nicely in place while Joanna's ships formed around her flag and executed a textbook pincer maneuver. Whoever was commanding the Cis ships there was no dummy either. They already had a sizable contingent of their heavy units rotating to intercept such an attack, yet for once the number game wasn't in the enemy's favor. When Joanna's battle group hit, the enemy only outnumbered our ships 3-2 and they simply lacked the number of battleships and dreadnoughts to come ahead in a firepower contest at those odds. That separatist force was going to either disengage and flee, surrender or die. Hopefully not the latter, because they had numbers enough to take too many of my own ships if they went for a last stand of their own. At any rate, that part of the battle was now handled, which left my own hands full with salvaging the predictable result of Tarkin's grand design. Even if this ultimately worked as he intended and we both lived to enjoy the fruits of this whole nonsense, I wasn't going to let him live it down anytime soon. No response to my polite request that our uninvited guests surrender? I asked the comm officer. A man can surely hope, right? None, General. There actually might be. The tactical officer, yet another clone like the whole crew of my new flag, pointed out at the hollow tank. The tactical situation was on, focused on the huge fur ball right above Theed of all places. Was that city cursed or something? There were a lot of red dots pushing against a painfully thin cordon trying to keep them mired in place. With every passing second more and more ships on both sides vanished from the plot. So far the exchange rate lightly favored us, at least number-wise, though with nothing left to shoot that was soon about to change. The Seppies look awfully eager to leave, don't they? I chuckled. It's like they don't like our hospitality. Let's do something about that. Prepare for a hyperspace insertion. The fleet will divide in 3 battle groups, Alpha, Beta, Gamma. I'm in charge of Alpha and we're going right there. I jabbed a finger at the only part of the enemy formation that wasn't completely englobed. Their ships there were still stuck under attack by Republic units, which still had a bit of ammo left and thus unable to disengage, nor in a position to break the englobement wide open, yet. An unhealthy amount of ramming runs against any group of separatist battleships that looked like they might achieve a breakthrough sort of that. Commodore Vigor will take command of Formation Beta and reinforce Admiral Tarkin while Gamma will aid Admiral Tigellinus on the other flank. As for Commander, after the battles at Sullust and Iriadu we've run out of experienced senior commanders, with Joanna and myself being the notable exceptions. Vigor was a clone captain who distinguished himself during our last couple of battles. His Rs and peers said good things, which prompted me to promote him to fill up some of the glaring gaping holes in our command structure, yet another thing preventing me from even attempting any complicated maneuvers when I wasn't leaning heavy on battle meditation. One of those days that might even change, though as wishes go I could perhaps ask for a whole new fleet complete with a year or two of supplies, including spare parts. Hyperspace calculations ready, General. Who will command Force Gamma? The captain asked. I'm actually not sure, I admitted. We're a bit low on experienced flag officers. Recommendations? Captains Marcel or Zed. They're among the more seasoned we have left and I know Zed has commanded a Venator squadron before. Zed is it then? Please inform him of his provisional promotion of Commodore and his new orders, then jump when ready. 30 seconds later, we entered and then exited hyperspace before we could even properly notice the transition and suddenly we were bow to engine with the enemy. Fire at will. I gave a redundant order. It took precious seconds for sensors to stabilize and lock on the nearest juicy target, then the enemy recoiled when a wall of turbo laser fire slammed into them from behind. Please inform the separatist in charge of this mess that their window of opportunity to flee just slammed shut. They will surrender now or die. It was more like either surrender or either die or flee with whatever they managed to extract from this debacle, because moments after I ordered the message sent, the firepower of the local Republic ships cut off to a tickle compared to what it was before. We've got signal from Admiral Tigellinus. His compliments for the timely arrival. Ammunition levels across the fleet just hit 0. They're going to take as many of the bastards with them to hell. He wishes us luck and that we would avenge them. Acknowledge. Send a message to the Admiral. He did great given the circumstances and he is ordered not to die like an imbecile. Otherwise, I would have to see if I could bring him back to strangle him myself. If anyone had to go down with the fleet it should be Tarkin. This was his bloody mess to clean up. If anyone had to fall on their sword it was Tarkin, damn him. Around us, more and more Republic ships that ran out of stuff to throw at the enemy went into terminal ramming runs. That caused an utter chaos in the surrounded separatist formation, which collapsed in front of our eyes. To be frank, I haven't seen such a clustercruff before in my life. The few instances I could recall of a fleet being trapped behind enemy lines that ran this low on supplies, both Empire and Republic, they had the good sense to surrender long before they got stuck in a position where they had to try around the enemy en masse. Damn it, that's Felix's ships. The captain let out a string of execute Mandalorian curses. I could hear the influence of certain general that now worked for me. In front of our eyes a whole Venator division, all made up by moderately to heavy damaged ships went straight for the throats of 3 Lucree hulks and a Providence dreadnought lurking just behind them. The battleships weren't in a pristine condition either. Their final defensive fire was too little too late and soon each got speared by an accelerating cruiser. The Providence was in a better condition, not to mention a much more agile ship. She managed to roll away just in time to avoid the last Venator and hammered it with her broadside as it flew by. This was pure force-damned madness and such a waste I was left